In 1539, Francois of France issued an edict to his people, admonishing them for the vast amounts of human waste that was ruining the streets of Paris, which the edict described as provoking great horror and greater displeasure in all valiant persons of substance. The good citizens of Paris were eventually ordered to dig cesspools in their own backyards as a method of waste removal. This got the muck off the streets, which was great. Not so great, however, was the ensuing cholera outbreak that wiped out 20,000 Parisians in 1832. Welcome to Intrigued Mind, where today we will take a look at the greatest poop disasters in history. Historically, poop has often been a problem for human settlements. Thankfully, the removal of human waste has evolved significantly over the millennia. But every once in a while comes along a poop disaster, just to remind us that we are human and not as clever nor as evolved as we might think. The first cesspools were thought to have been dug in Mesopotamia in around 4000 BCE. Evidence of household flush toilets that were cleared using buckets of water have been discovered on the British island of Skara Brae, dating back to circa 3000 BCE. By 312 BCE, the ancient Romans were laying miles of sewers and providing public latrines for their citizens. The bench seat toilets at the Cloaca Maxima in Rome can attest to this. But like so many advances in technology, once the Roman Empire fell, things got, well, really clogged up. Pit toilets for the poor and garderobes for the rich were the order of the day in the Middle Ages. A garderobe was a small stone room built high up off the ground that jutted out of the castle walls so that poop could fall directly into the moat or onto the ground below. Our first great poop disaster took place on July 25, 1184. Several members of the Holy Roman Empire's nobility died in a freak accident at St. Peter's Church in Erfurt, Germany. Counts, princes, and the Holy Roman Emperor himself met to discuss a land dispute. Unfortunately, the meeting had only just begun when the chamber's wooden floor broke under the strain, sending these distinguished men crashing through the first floor into the latrine in the cellar. 60 nobles died that day. One suffered a broken neck, some drowned, and others were suffocated by the noxious fumes. The use of the chamber pot was common practice up until the Industrial Revolution. By this point in time, men had been employed to simply sweep up human waste from the streets and take it away, a practice that had been established in France in the 12th century. Thank goodness for a 19th century London plumber called Thomas Crapper, who manufactured a line of flushing toilets that were designed with the everyday household in mind. Prior to this, only the very rich could afford a flush toilet, the first of which was created for Queen Elizabeth I of England in the year 1596. Apparently, she was not a fan. Engineers were now employed by cities to design sewerage systems to carry waste from homes and businesses out to treatment plants, humorously referred to as shit farms. But even this innovation did not prevent some of the greatest poop disasters in history, such as the sinking of the Princess Alice. London's Thames River was so overrun with sewage that by 1858, the smelly situation was dubbed the Great Stink. On September 3, 1878, a ship called SS Princess Alice crashed into another vessel. She sank at the site where London's sewage pumping stations were situated. These pumping stations released 75 million gallons of effluent into the Thames twice a day. The recovery of the dead was a filthy affair, the bodies rotting faster than normal after soaking in the sewage, unusually bloated and covered in slime. 16 passengers who were lucky enough to survive the sinking of the Princess Alice very quickly became unlucky when they died of exposure to the sewage they had floated in whilst awaiting rescue. Many more people fell ill, and due to the accelerated decomposition rate, many of the corpses that had been retrieved from the putrid water had to be buried in a mass grave, unidentified to this day. One of Australia's state capital cities, Melbourne, was nicknamed Smellbourne. So bad was the stench from cesspits, open drains, and night soil. Given that nightmen only came to empty out the wooden buckets of Melbourneian households once a week, no wonder a typhoid outbreak swept through the city, killing hundreds of men, women, and children. But it wasn't only human excrement that was causing problems in the developed world of the 19th century. The Great Horse Manure Crisis of 1894 rocked the city of London to the extent that the topic of horse poop was put on the agenda at the world's first International Urban Planning Conference in New York. London was home to thousands of small horse-drawn carriages called hansom cabs, buses that were pulled by packs of 12 horses, and a great many horse-drawn wagons that were used to deliver goods around the city. It was estimated that there were 50,000 horses in London at this time, with each horse producing 15 to 35 pounds of manure per day. The Times newspaper reported that in 50 years, every street in London will be buried under 9 feet of manure. Thankfully, motorized transportation was not too far off the horizon. thus ending the horse manure crisis by the early 20th century. Poop disasters are not something that are relegated to the annals of history either. As recently as 2007, a poop disaster in the Gaza Strip killed 4 people and partially destroyed a nearby village. The dam wall of a cesspool burst, and the United Nations had to be called in to man the cleanup operation. Many villagers fell ill after their homes were flooded with sewage that measured 2 meters high. In the same year, a sewerage treatment plant in Edinburgh, Scotland, failed when one of its pumps broke down. Millions of liters of raw sewage poured into the waterways near the city, enough to fill 170 Olympic-sized swimming pools. This time, however, the death toll was not a human one. The victims of this disaster were the wildlife that inhabited the befouled Forth River estuary, comprising mainly fish and bird species. Some of history's greatest poop disasters have less to do with sewage and more to do with unsanitary people. An immigrant from Northern Ireland by the name of Mary Mallin took a position as a cook in several wealthy New York households from 1900 to 1907. 7 out of the 8 families Mary worked for contracted typhoid. A total of 53 people were infected with the disease as a result of Mary Mallin. Once the authorities realized that Mary was the common factor in all of these households' cases, she was quarantined. Her feces tested positive for the pathogen that causes typhoid, and it was thought that Mary was an asymptomatic carrier, meaning that while she could pass on the disease, she herself was in good health. During her time in quarantine, Mary Mallin confessed that she rarely, if ever, washed her hands. She has gone down in history as Typhoid Mary, and 3 people died as a result of her unsanitary ways. When one family fell ill, Mary would simply vanish and find another position under an alias. Until her dying day, Typhoid Mary was adamant that she did not carry the disease. Our final poop disaster relates to the commode itself. In 2018, an American toilet manufacturing company called Flushmate recalled 1.4 million toilet flushing systems after 1,700 reports were made about exploding toilets. These faulty commodes injured 23 people and caused $710,000 worth of property damage. One unfortunate Flushmate user had to undergo surgery on their foot after an explosion. It could have been worse. Next time you visit the commode, spare a thought for poor old Godfrey the Hunchback, Duke of Lorraine. In 1069, a paid assassin hid in the latrines that lay beneath his garderobe. As the Duke answered the call of nature, the assassin stabbed him with a blade up through his bowels. He lingered for several days before dying from his wounds. Humans and animals alike are hardwired to feel disgusted by poop. Everything about it grosses us out. The sight, the smell, even the mere thought. Thankfully, doing our business today in developed countries is a safe and sanitary affair. And as they say, out of sight, out of mind. Just spare a thought for the humble plumber, who is the one we call when our toilet goes on strike. There you have it, viewers. Some of the greatest poop disasters in history. You will never take your humble toilet for granted ever again. For more videos on the most amazing forgotten parts of our history, be sure to subscribe to the Intrigued Mind channel, like the video, and leave your suggestions in the comments below.